Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, March 24th. Welcome to the bi-weekly Kubernetes SIG Testing meeting. I'm your host, Aaron Krickenberger. This meeting is being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube later today. As a reminder, we adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct in this meeting, which basically boils down to don't be a jerk. We have a couple things on the agenda today. We're going to talk about periodics for C Group V2 support. Josh Burkus is going to talk to us a bit about the proposal from the LTS working group. Jeff is going to talk to us about Vasquez as a product. Paris is going to talk to us a little bit about the results of the contributor experience survey and how, what that means to us as a SIG. And Alvaro will talk about in-repo config for Prow. So with that, I'd like to hand off to Harshal to discuss C Group V2 tests.
Yeah, hi, Aaron. Thanks, Aaron. So the point I want to talk about, yes, C Group V2. So C Group V2 support is coming in Kubernetes. The PR is about to get merged the moment we have the window open for 1.19, and the run C Group support was merged just I think last week. Creo already supports C Group V2. They used to use a different runtime called CRun, which they wrote. So having said all that, we thought, like the Kubernetes already runs prod test cases for containerd as a pre-submit as well as periodics. If you go to config jobs Kubernetes SIG node, there is a containerd already runs a bunch of test cases against various versions of Kubernetes. So I came to this meeting mainly from trying to understand if the community will be okay with adding cryo test case as well. And the C Group V2 aspect is since cryo stack already has C Group V2 support enabled, we could enable even Kubernetes to test C Group V2. So apart from, let me copy paste the link, which test I'm talking about in the chat. Yep. So these already have a containerd test cases there. Creo test cases. Ideally, we will like to have test cases for pre-submit as well. But since this will be first time we want to run these test cases, I think that if we start running them as periodic, it will give us more confidence about their stability. I don't expect any issue from runtime point of view just because we change from container to Creo. I don't expect any changes, but nevertheless, that's the path I was thinking. And I think Peter Hunt from Red Hat had spoken to SIG testing, I believe last year, where he also was told that starting with periodics is a good idea till you get some confidence in your testing. That is, so does it make sense if I start working on adding the test cases which are very similar to containerd because both are runtimes, but they will invoke Creo? And the second question I have is that so we want to have an operating system which supports C Group V2 by default, and that's Fedora 31. So I have a Fedora 31 container image in Google Cloud, but that's in our OpenShift OpenShift project ID. Can I use that image while running the test cases here? Sorry if this sounds very simple, or if I miss something. I'm just starting to learn Prow and get this going. So two questions: are we okay as a community? Feel okay me adding to CRI? Creo test cases and as a periodic to begin with, and second is I need to use Fedora 31 because that ships with C Group V2 enabled by default, which I have tested independently, but as a part of this workflow.
Does anybody have any feedback for Harshal? Okay. So I'm not intimately familiar with how SIG has set up the ability to test with container D versus whatever the default container runtime is. I think from a SIG testing perspective, we have no opinion on what tests you want to run as long as they're related to the Kubernetes project. It sounds like they are in this case, but I think the next piece would be that SIG would be willing to support these tests so that if they fail, they go green. So to me, I feel like if you haven't discussed this with SIG already, I would go there. But I don't think we have any like opinions on what image you use to stand up your cluster or what runtimes you use. It's just a question of whether or not SIG is willing to support that.
Will it be okay if I create a work in progress PR here and then go on because they have a call right now, same time, so I can go there to discuss that work in progress PR next Tuesday. But
sure.
Yeah,
That
okay.
sounds good to me, unless anybody else has any strong opinions. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.
I think that's all I had. Thanks.
All right. Oh, thank God, somebody else popped up on video. It's not just me. Hi, Josh. Would you like to
Hey
talk
there.
to us about the OneYear PAC Support Cap?
Yep. So link is there in the notes. We've been working on this cap for a while. This is from the LTS working group. After doing a huge survey and talking to a lot of individual users and talking to a lot of people, we discovered that what people really wanted out of LTS was slightly longer patch support. And by slightly longer, we mean about 4 months longer. That was not the majority opinion, but the plurality opinion. The one move we could make that helped the largest number of users. However, as you can imagine, extending our period of patch support means also extending our period of test coverage, as well as increasing the number of Skew tests to cover more versions. So a lot of the impact of this change, if we do it, is going to affect SIG testing and test infra. And as such, although a lot of people have commented on it from a testing perspective, we wanted to make sure that everybody in SIG testing had seen this and had a chance to file objections, to remark on things that we forgot about, to propose alternative courses of action.
Has anybody here had a chance to review the cap? Okay. So I glanced over it, but haven't had a chance to look over everybody's comments line by line. I appreciate you showing up here so I could ask some silly questions. So the first one is, I feel like from SIG testing's perspective, I'm not sure how this impacts us. Like, I recognize it would result in the creation of more jobs, but I feel like all of the jobs that are necessary to support the different versions of Kubernetes are these days more or less under the purview of the release team, right? And we've kind of automated away the administrivia of like maintaining yet another set of jobs for yet another branch. So I feel like most of the burden is on the release team there. And as long as they're fine with it, that seems great. The question I have is maybe not necessarily under SIG testing's purview, but seems like the longest tent pole is expanding version skew. I feel like expanding version skew has kind of a long-lasting impact on SIGs like SIG node and SIG API machinery, SIG CLI.
Yeah.
Has that been discussed by those SIGs? Are they okay with that?
I don't have the status sheet in front of me, but we divided up among the working group going to all the SIG meetings. Originally, of course, we were going to tackle this during the contributor summit that's now not happening.
Right.
But it is our goal to get sign off by everybody. One of the things, by the way, being debated is the current proposal is to extend support by simply extending it for one more release. That is,
Right.
we would offer, starting at version 119 would continue to receive patches for about 13 months instead of about 10.
Right.
However, there is an alternative proposal that, depending on the feedback we get, we might get pushed towards, which is changing our release cycle to be 4 months instead of 3. Because what users are concerned about is the amount of time that patches are supported, not the number of releases.
Okay. I did not, I guess I glanced too quickly to notice that as an alternative.
Yeah. I mean,
That
right
sounds
now, when we
more
discussed it in LTS, we thought changing the release cycle was going to be more complicated than extending support for one additional release.
Okay.
But there are other people who feel differently.
Yeah. Because my perspective is, especially in the context of skew testing, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe right now the release team only uses one job for skew testing. And I think that is you test the N-1 version of kubectl against the N version of Kubernetes. So 118 is like out the door soonish, today-ish. So the test confirms that kubectl 117 would work against it, right?
Yeah. And
now you already support kubectl 116 should also be able to talk to that, if I remember correctly. So you're talking about expanding it such that kubectl 115 would also be able to talk to the API server.
Yeah, because our anticipation is
Right.
that if we extend patch support to a year, we are going to have some users who will literally skip 3 versions for an upgrade.
Right.
And
But
to the extent that we can make that not a total disaster, it's helpful.
Right. But they won't be able to because the kubelets supported version skew right now is 1 version, and you're proposing expanding it to 2.
Yeah.
And it's not clear to me whether either of those scenarios are currently covered by testing. Lubomir, maybe you can correct me here. I know you've done some upgrade work with Kinder, but it's not clear to me whether or not you're doing skew testing to confirm that like the 118 version of Kubernetes works with 117 nodes.
So we are not in particular skewing kubectl. I know that the kubectl skew is -1, 0, +1, which is version in the past, version in the future, and the current version. For the kubelet skew, we don't have one in kubeADM testing.
Okay.
The supported version of the kubelet is the current one, and also one version in the past supports the current API server. Sorry, I didn't phrase this correctly, but 117 kubelet can work with the 117 API server and also with an API server that is 118. We don't have tests for that. Maybe in the future, it's just a limited bandwidth. We have the kubeADM sites to implement these extra tests. I think there might be some tests for the kubelet skew out there, but I'm not sure. Maybe the release team knows, maybe SIG node knows.
Right. And so my concern is that increasing the kubelet skew is probably introduces probably far more complexity. And the state of skew coverage today is pretty low. And I already feel like there's a lot of combinations you would want to test. I feel like it could get prohibitively large if you were to expand version skew further than you have. but I'm happy to like take the rest of my comments to the KEP. I just wasn't sure how much that aspect had been run by other SIGs, because from SIG testing's perspective, we don't write those tests, we don't own those tests, we're not going to like troubleshoot those tests or whatever. So I'm just concerned about the complexity that introduces and who would be willing to staff up to support that.
Yeah, and that's potentially a blocker. Unfortunately, the SIG node meeting is right now, so I won't be discussing that with them until next week.
Okay. Maybe like giving them a heads up over the mail list or something to highlight that would be helpful. Does anybody else have any comments or questions for Josh about the OneYear support cap?
I have a quick comment, more like a question, I guess. Does this only affect Kubekins, which is now versioned?
Affect what?
Kubekins, the Kubekins image.
Ben, unfortunately, you sound a little bit like a chipmunk right now. I think your Bluetooth audio is having problems.
I thought it was just me.
No. I'm sorry, Lubomir, I don't understand your question.
I don't think it would affect the Kubekins image. That thing is such a mess. We really kind of don't want to touch it if we don't have to. My understanding is the way that Skew testing works today is we wouldn't be pre-installing any, like we don't bake any existing version of Kubernetes into Kubekins, as far as I know. We instead we download releases of Kubernetes. So we would just be downloading the versions that are being skewed and using those, or the jobs would.
I think we used to include a kubectl version inside Kubekins.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's Ben, you're sad R2D2 right now.
How about we take that offline? Yeah, okay, what he said. So we put a version from gcloud that dispatches over kubectl versions, which is, I think, something that somebody already suggested on the KEP to improve the ability of kubectl to talk to different different versions. That seems like the easy thing, which again is why I go back to, I don't know about kubelet version skew. That seems dicey. Yes, the dispatcher is open source, and somebody's definitely linked that in a comment on the KEP.
And the versions of Kubekins, do you like store them as a history? You know, once a version of Kubernetes goes out of support. My question is, I guess, should we keep one more version of Kubekins as maintainable?
That seems fair. I honestly don't know whether or not we babysit Kubekins or the release team babysits Kubekins. I feel like I've seen a fair amount of collaboration there, and I don't, yeah, like Ben says, I don't feel like Kubekins is a huge additional maintenance burden or the source of additional complexity. So to me, it comes down to, yeah, there will be extra jobs. And so we need to make sure that like Prow is performant enough to be able to handle more jobs.
I think the extra jobs are probably actually negligible, especially if we follow our current branching scheme where we for the older the branch is, the less often we run all the periodics on it.
Right.
Like currently our N-2 jobs run every 6 or 12 hours for the most part. I think adding a bunch more 6 or 12 hour jobs will not be noticeable.
Right.
Okay, thanks for clarifying this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think the only other thing, which I think is mentioned somewhere in the cap, I think someone commented about this, is just the security windows to dependencies. So for example, Go, we already sort of are often like right at the limit of a Go release. By the time we get to an end of a Kubernetes release, so we're going here, that's guaranteeing we're going to have to update Go on a branch at some point. And that's probably fine, but it's something to think about. It's not really testing exactly, but it's kind of testing. I don't know. It's build at least.
Yeah, I don't know. I was kind of wary of bringing up Go because some of the select few who know the magical incantations and places to do things to bump Go are in this meeting, but I don't necessarily consider it to be SIG testing's responsibility. But certainly from a support window perspective, it would be great if Go's support window kind of expanded a little bit to help support us in this.
Yeah, it's not only Go. There's a few other things that we've run into as problems with, short-term upstream support. The problem is that's going to be a problem regardless of what mechanism we use to extend patch support. Within the KEP, we say specifically, we've got a couple of people in the LTS who have experience doing LTSs for, say, Linux distributions. And from our experience, any sort of uniform policy for how to deal with those does not succeed in actual applicability. That what we're going to end up doing is taking, failure to support upstream on a case-by-case basis. To the extent that we can influence the Golang team to offer more patch support, that would be awesome. I'm not necessarily expecting that to work, though.
Okay, any other questions for Josh? Okay, thanks for showing up, Josh. Really appreciate it. And
Thank
like
you.
I said, I will definitely be following up a little bit more on the KEP. All right, next up, Jeff, you're here to talk to us about Vasquez as a product.
Yes, so I've linked here in the notes, and I can also share, I think I have it saved. Let me just double check I have the right link saved. How many windows open? I'll share here as well. I suddenly shared this document with SIG Testing last night. So if you haven't seen it yet, that's okay. I just wanted to kind of give some context, and then we can continue some of this discussion offline. But the basic context of this was that we've been at least using, inside Google, we've been using Vasquez for some of our products and some of our projects. And so we have a number of different deployments, and due to the nature that Vasquez kind of works, or I guess if everyone, I don't know if everyone is here is familiar with Vasquez, I should start with that. So Vasquez is kind of a piece component that runs usually in the build cluster alongside ProwJobs. And basically it manages resources for you, so you can share resources among different jobs. So for example, on the open source Kubernetes, we largely use Vasquez for tracking GCP projects. And so there's basically a life cycle of we have all of these free GCP projects, and then a job can basically request a project, it'll get assigned to the job can do whatever it wants with it, it returns the project, it's then marked as dirty, and then there's janitors inside Vasquez that go and they clean up the project, return it to a free state so the next job can then run. So basically kind of allows us to share resources in a meaningful way so we don't have to create a new, the old way used to be creating a new project for every single job, and this was really painful and not very good use of resources, or sharing resources, which is also problematic. So basically the system was written. Over time, it's kind of gotten more and more features. Like there's a system called Mason, which allows you to actually take one of these static resources, you call them, and then generate other resources. So for example, I think Istio worked on one which will pre-create a GKE cluster for you. So if you're testing Istio, you don't necessarily want to wait to create a Kubernetes cluster. You want to immediately begin your test with a pre-created Kubernetes GKE cluster. So Vasquez has a system that will allow you to do that. So we kind of add these features. I know OpenShift, I think, is using Vasquez for some resource tracking. And then we are doing this with a number of different projects inside Google. We're kind of running into some issues where basically different teams are running Vasquez, and it's not super well supported. It was kind of, written as this pretty simple system, but it's kind of grown features, and it has some technical debt basically to work with. And I know Like Alvaro has worked on fixing some of this technical debt, as has Steve, and I'm trying to tackle some of this as well. But basically also to have, in addition to kind of fixing this technical debt, wanting to have a better model of like, how do people actually use Vasquez? Because right now it's kind of just like, well, go find an existing deployment and maybe run it, and at some point maybe upgrade and try to figure out what has changed. And, you know, if your resources, like, there's really like not really a very good story for like how you should actually use this. It's kind of very much, if you already use Vasquez, if you wrote Vasquez, you know how to use it. If you're on, you know, the Kubernetes enterprise team at Google, maybe you can use it. But if you're anyone else, like, it's kind of this, I don't know, disaster is the right word, but it's very challenging. You know, it's not necessarily super easy to use. So basically, I kind of wrote up this document, kind of looking at some of the challenges people have faced, and trying to figure out how we can actually make this so that it's a product where we can, you know, improve it, but also make it more of a self-service product that people can use. So that's kind of the overall background of this here. And so I kind of have listed a number of different, you know, I think I have like 4 different categories, which I've kind of broken down into like ease of deployment, improved observability, painless upgrades, and kind of a method of like how people can, this is kind of more targeted towards the Google internal teams, but can probably apply generally as like how we want to sort of have a support escalation. So like if something does go wrong with one of the Vasquez components, like who do you talk to? You know, what do we expect people can debug themselves versus what people should tackle, or what should be escalated? Sorry, trade hot. So basically, you know, you can read through this, but sort of the idea of the ease deployment, you know, generally wanting to, you know, actually improve the documentation so it's actually useful. Having some example, it's like right now it's very much for like, hey, you are like developing Vasquez and you want to kind of play with it, like use this mode that doesn't longer exists and like doesn't actually tell you how to like create a production Vasquez deployment, or like something that actually has good monitoring and like is an actually good version, because you might grab a random version that maybe there's a bug that we, you know, just don't know about. So, you know, having kind of just some very easy things, along with having a way to easily set up a local deployment where you could write your own Mason implementation or something like that. I will come back to this comment in just a second. Hold that thought. Unless something, if someone wants to interject immediately with a question, please do so. Otherwise, I'll come back. I see some questions in chat. I'll come back to those in a second. I'll just kind of run through this doc otherwise. So, you know, basically trying to, you know, have some basic recommendations of like how you should set up Vasquez, some basic recommendations around monitoring and things and alerting potentially that you might want to do. Because right now, like I said, you know, there's a great deployment for like the open source Kubernetes deployment of Vasquez, but everyone else is kind of left in the dark of whatever they want to do. We also want to improve the error messages, and the logging right now is not super helpful. It's really hard to tell what the system is. It's hard to tell when something goes wrong, what has actually gone wrong. Like, we'll occasionally run issues where we'll run out of resources, and the only way you know something is wrong is that all of the jobs have started failing because all the resources have gotten dirty. And now, great, now we have to like figure out, okay, well, you have to go try to fix that, figure out what happened, figure out the root cause, clean up everything. And, you know, meanwhile, everyone's mad because like you can't merge PRs because everything's broken. So, you know, we want to have earlier alerting, which, you know, we're starting to get with open source again, with some of the monitoring alerting there, but it's still hard to tell, even if like you get alerting that all the resources are gone. Okay, well, we discovered it before somebody complained their tests were failing, but we still don't know what actually happened. So try to improve a lot of that. So just trying to have better metrics to be able to understand, like, you know, is cleanup getting slower? Are we, you know, is the janitors failing a lot more often? Things like that, so we can actually identify something is wrong before we just have run out of resources, which is currently our kind of level of monitoring. So trying to improve a lot of that and just understand better what the system is doing. Another thing I mentioned here is, you know, painless upgrades. You know, some of our deployments, we're running versions of Vasquez from like, you know, almost a year old. And so, you know, if they want to get the latest and greatest features, or like any of the performance improvements we've landed, we have to now figure out, you know, what other things have changed. And, you know, I think currently these are documented, if you're lucky, in the PROW release notes, but there's a lot of other stuff there. And so it's really hard to tell, like, okay, what has actually happened? So one of the things I was actually suggesting here, well, there's a few things. One thing is potentially actually having explicitly tagged releases. So rather than like just, you know, grab the version that was built today, you could say like grab, you know, version 0.2 or 0, you know, whatever the version number is that, you know, we release like every 2 weeks or every month or something. And so we know this has been tested. We know this actually works. You can upgrade to this version. We guarantee it's actually going to work. And then, you know, then you can also, if you're building Mason, you know exactly what version of the code to use. Part of this, I suggest, is we may actually want to move Vasquez out of test infra. So rather than having everything there, just having its own little repository so that we can, focus on, if you want to work on Vasquez, you want to improve things. My high CPU usage is affecting the meeting quality. Cool. Hopefully you can all still hear me and see me. Okay, great. So basically, moving Vasquez into some repository, I think Alvaro actually mentioned this to me yesterday. A good idea for this is that if you really just want to work on Vasquez or are interested in that, you only have to look at that repository. You don't have to care about everything else that's happening in test info, which is kind of this like mix of everything. So that's a potential idea. That also allows us to kind of control our release story. It just makes, I think it makes a lot of things easier where it's very clear. If you need to do something with Vasquez, here is everything you need. Here are the deployments. Here's the documentation. It's not kind of mixed in with everything in test info, which is, has a bunch of things, has Prow, it has a lot of the Kubernetes CI configuration, kind of, it's kind of just a mix of a bunch of things. So it's basically just trying to improve kind of the release process a little bit, actually have a release process, which we don't have right now, have some actual testing on explicit versions to make sure more than like toss it up in Prow and, hope it works and see what happens. So trying to improve that a little bit. And then last piece here was just sort of this idea of support escalation. And basically, ideally, if we have all of these other components in place where you have good monitoring, good observability into the system, hopefully you can first see, like, if you're running out of resources, maybe it's your custom resource is having issues or something else. If it's actually something that's wrong in the Vasquez system, then escalate to people who are working on Vasquez. But try to have it just so that, like, basically if we have end deployments, I can't just be me looking at every single end deployment. We need to have some way of kind of scaling that. So trying to establish some sort of method of doing that. So that's kind of all I have there. Just scrolling back in here, Daniel, is there a way to run Vasquez one project in the pool, and does it work with hyperscalers other than Google as well? So I mean, yeah, you could have, I guess, your pool can be, you could have one single resource. Hyperscalers other than Google. I don't know what you mean by work with hyperscalers other than Google. But basically, at least Vasquez is super agnostic about whatever the actual resource is. Really actually at its core, currently Vasquez, basically the resource is just a string to it. And you can have janitors, we have a janitor that works on GCP projects. We have a janitor that works on AWS accounts. You can have janitors that work on other resources as well. Basically, you just have it create and that's something we might, improve the workflow a little bit around this, or, actually have a better framework for usually building a janitor, because right now it's kind of still a little hacky, not great. But basically, you could just create another controller you could run your Vasquez deployment that would check out dirty resources of that type and goes and cleans up whatever it needs to be. So I could have some hypothetical resource that, if I wanted to use Azure accounts or, some other resource or something, you can have it go and clean those things up and then return them for you. So it's pretty agnostic, and I want to make it, part of this is basically making it well documented and having these frameworks so that if you want to do this, it's really, really easy to just plug in your custom scripts, your custom implementation, and then plug it in, and then you have that thing working. So so we have it on ClinicScript. So yeah, basically we want to make that really easy to plug in. Any other thoughts or comments on this? Again, I'll actually email out the doc as well, and we can continue discussion and comments there. And then so far, everyone I've talked to, I've written this to, has generally seemed to be in favor, positive of those ideas. So assuming there's no other, but we'll continue the discussion, then I'll probably turn this into more concrete example or concrete actions as well.
What Daniel said, I really like the idea of actual releases. That sounds wonderful. A silly question that maybe isn't 100% related to this. I'm looking out at creating a Prow build cluster over in CNCF's Google project with the intent of eventually scheduling a bunch of Kubernetes jobs over there. My understanding is that I will also need to stand up a Vasquez instance over there so that it can manage the CNCF projects, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. And that's one of the reasons we're kind of seeing this explosion of Vasquez deployments is currently, generally Vasquez lives inside the build cluster. So if you have one, admin Prow cluster and you have a bunch of Vasquez or build clusters that, service that one main Prow, control plane, basically need a Vasquez deployment per build cluster. And so that's why kind of it starts to become this management challenge when you have all these different Vasquez deployments, and so you need to keep them all in sync or working.
One comment to that. So I know that what you're saying is true today for, I guess, Kubernetes, but in OpenShift, we actually have one Vasquez instance that is used by multiple build clusters. We added, I think, HT access support for that in October or something, but this works and is also a possible approach. So it doesn't have to be one instance per build cluster.
Yeah, that's true. I don't think, I guess, or I forget actually how is it, could you clarify, is it just, you just have like login access that's just to Vasquez itself, or is it actually at like the resource level you can control like which users or accounts have access to specific resources inside Vasquez?
No, it's just a global thing that there's HT access to access the API, and then you can do whatever you can do via its API. Okay.
Catherine knows we should probably move on, so we can continue discussion offline, but thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, so Paris, I know you said you wanted to go last, and then Alvaro added something about in repo config. Do you want to swap with Alvaro, or do you want to go now?
Yeah, let's swap with Alvaro too.
All right.
It seems important.
Okay.
Okay,
Alvaro,
okay, thank you, Owen. My point won't take super long anyway. So to give a bit of context, over the course of the last year, I added the in repo config feature to Pro, which is essentially similar to a travis.yaml or a circleci.yaml file. It allows you to put your job configuration into the repository that is being tested, and then have it dynamically loaded by Pro when it's needed. This has a couple of advantages, among them that the job configuration stays in sync with the code, and that if you create a pull request in which you change the job config, you get direct feedback if this works. Today, the whole workflow is just you change the job and you hope it's not broken. This obviously has some implication on trust insofar as the job config in the context of in repo config lives in a different repository. But I would really like to see this enabled at least for smaller repositories in the Kubernetes SIG organization or something the like. And the obvious implication of that is that the Google folks that today support the Pro infrastructure need to be okay with that. And to discuss this, I opened this issue that's linked in the doc. Ben already left some comments in there, and I would really like everyone else from the Google folks that will end up having to be okay with this to comment and express any concerns if you have there, so I can start with the GDoc and we can probably see if concerns can be addressed.
okay, that sounds good. I wish other folks who had a lot more expertise in this were present to comment on this. My gut tells me I'm a little wary of this as well.
I am strongly opposed to turning this on for Kubernetes. There we go.
For Kubernetes, as in the
for our instance, rather.
Okay.
In particular, I have two concerns. One of them is that we are heavily dependent on having all of the configuration centralized so we can batch edit it, which we do fairly frequently. And the other one are the trust issues that you mentioned. In particular, the fact that you no longer need to actually have your job committed to get it to run. That said, I am mostly concerned about the management issues that this causes rather than the trust ones, I think.
Right.
Okay, could you just add that to the issue? That would be super
Sure.
great. I think it's a solvable problem, but yeah.
Yeah, because the issue is right now we kind of, if any of the job images changes, such as kubekins, for example, there are about 1,100 jobs right now that use kubekins. And it's great that we only have one repo to PR against to update that instead of a bunch of different repos.
Yes, but there are also a lot of jobs that do not use this image and use something like just Golang and just execute a Go test, for example.
Sure.
I mean, it's not supposed to like be the best choice for everyone in every situation, but I think there are some very good use cases for it. That's why I would like it to not be generally disabled. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Any other comments or questions for Alvaro? All right, Paris, you want to talk to us about the contributor experience survey?
Yay! Hey everyone, data and charts here. So we did do a contributor experience survey. I'm not sure if folks took that, but just to give context, we released it late last year into early this year. So technically it's like 2019-2020 survey. Who really looks at dates anyway. But it was really to get a capture of the pulse of the community for the programs and processes and sub-projects that we have in contributor experience, which, as everybody in this room knows, sometimes overlays with SIG testing and things like that. So I know Christoph was intentional for putting some specific wording and language in there around testing and infrastructure. So I wanted to show you some of those questions specifically, and also show you kind of where this stuff is stored and talk to you about the data itself so that you can be self-sufficient and get what you need out of it. Since, you know, especially we only have like 10 minutes or so, and I don't want to go through the data. You're going to see there's so many charts in the public bucket that we have. So there's just not enough time to go through each one. And many of them aren't necessarily applicable to this group either. For instance, questions like, you know, the community meeting or mentoring, things like that. So, all right, I'm going to share my screen. And see if this works. All right. Does everybody see SurveyMonkey or charts? All right, cool. All right, so some quick things about the survey itself. The survey was conducted on SurveyMonkey. We did that so we could get a global audience. It is very heavy itself as far as the data it comes back with and the data that it allows. So we can do pretty much whatever we need. This is also a plea to you all as SIG testing if you want to do surveys throughout the year for your crew or do more testing related and infrastructure related questions on the contributor experience, like specific PROW questions, for instance. We're game for it. So anyway, I'm going to breeze through just a few of the questions on here. We had 25. So again, just not enough time. But this just shows you who is taking this survey. We had 230-ish respondents. But this just gives you a little bit about the personas of the people that took it. So clearly, there's definitely a lot of folks who weren't yet members. But then there's about, I don't know, 50% or so that are in some kind of membership review or approver sub-project owner category that they self-identify as. And then this is a positive one that I wanted to share as well. Are you interested in advancing to the next level of that contributor ladder? So many people said yes, which is heartwarming because that means, yes, they want to build trust with you all. And then obviously this just no, which I did do some digging here, and a lot of those no's were people who are already sub-project owners. So can't go really that, if you're already at the high, you can't really go that much higher. So anyway, that's just a little bit of background of the people that have taken this. And then here is a good one that I wanted to show y'all. So we can also play with the different chart types here, but this is, please rate any challenges that you've had with the contribution process, and by steps. We can see the whole words here because they are cut off in the chart. But if it's 5, that means they're saying that it's the most challenging part, which is the orange. So the greater the orange bar there is the most challenging. And then the green is not challenging at all. So the thicker the bar for green means that they don't think it's a problem whatsoever. So the thickest bar right there is GitHub tools and processes for the not challenging piece. And then the most challenging thickest would be big surprise debugging test failures. We actually did go in and dig. I see some chats going up. We did actually dig into this, and I'm going to show you some Jupyter Notebook stuff in a second. But we did dig into this part of the data for sure that you'll see in the images. Just kind of see like who was saying this, like what personas and like how many years of experience and things along those lines. And shocker, it was across the board. Reviewers had a slight edge of annoyance with it, but it was by a pizza pie sliver. So not, not necessarily totally noteworthy there. So again, I'll give you this data that y'all can dig into yourselves. But let me go and get through the other questions really quickly. And then here you can see what the other selections were too, by the way. So like we had one that said RCI labels, crafted, customized automation. Maybe we could do better next time and say prow, or call words out and things like that. And then this one is do you agree with the following statements? 1 is strongly disagree, and 5 is strongly agree. And then here's the questions down here. Sorry, Survey Monkey, super weird and heavy. 1 is, I understand enough about how Kubernetes CI works to be able to diagnose my own PR failures. The next statement is, when something is broken in my PR, I can read the comments from CI and understand why. The next, the number of test failures unrelated to my PR severely impacts my ability or desire to contribute. And then the last, there are too many notifications to be helpful when I open a PR. And this is saying that the strongly agree statement is, I understand enough about how Kubernetes CI works to be able to diagnose my own PR failures. But as y'all can see in the weighted averages, it's like by hairs. So again, this is something else that we did dig into, again, by persona, and did some other digging to see how we can draw out some more trends here and, help folks out. And that's in the charts and in the Jupyter Notebook that I'm going to provide y'all as well. And then, here's what areas of Kubernetes you contribute to. Again, this is sort of a demographics question. And that is testing infrastructures, pretty high, 50 or 60-ish people said that they contribute to it, which is good. And then also another comment about this, compared to the 2018 survey, people actually are committing less code inside of core, which we consider like Kubernetes repository, which proves some of the efforts that are going on are being relayed through this contributor experience survey as well. There are a ton of things that people suggested in here that are related to testing, and this is the free form question of what can we do to make things better for you. And I will get you all of those free form questions. Again, y'all will see them as soon as we release this data specifically. So you can see that for yourselves. And then I think that might have been it for y'all. And then let me show you the rest of the stuff that I'm talking about. So this is what we're getting together right now for CNCF. What we're going to do is a blog post with pretty charts and graphics, and there folks are going to take it from here. And what I mean from here is this. This is the images that were produced from a Jupyter Notebook. We hired a firm to do this. We did it so that there was no bias. None of us touched the data or made any suggestions to the data or told any stories that we wanted to tell through the data. This is the data. Someone else did this. It's actually an Apache Software Foundation shop, and they're super awesome folks and already know, open source landscapes and things like that. So they actually have a lot of fun doing this. But these are all of the charts that were produced from some of the digging. And again, these are public. You'll have access to these as well. And what else did I want to show you? There's also a retro survey issue right here. So if you have any things that you want to comment about the survey itself and want to see it get better for 2020, or hey, you have additional testing questions that you think you want to add, etc., you can pile them here for us so that we can be useful to you next year. And then again, themselves, the charts are inside of the contributors at Kubernetes Google Drive. So feel free to, grab those there. I did share them with the chairs today, but they will be shared with the broader audience, including Kubernetes dev, I'd say within the next 24 hours. I'm just buttoning up and patching up a lot of this stuff now. So any questions? I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can look at chat. Hold on one sec. All right. Nope. All right, cool. Yeah, Lubomir. Having PRs rejected, not challenging at all. I know. Any questions or comments about the survey data? The one question that we accidentally left off was probably a testing question, and that was left off an error, and ironically 10 people did not pick it up. And it was the how do you consume? Do you do desktop, mobile? How are you consuming GitHub, pretty much? So that was the only question that was accidentally laid off that might have been applicable to you all. But
so what is available to us in terms of year-over-year analysis? Like, I guess I don't know how many of these questions were the same question as last year, and if we could compare, like, if things have gotten better or worse.
The what is the hardest part question was on last year's survey as well. I don't think it had exactly the same options, but a lot of the options were the same.
Paris, you were muted if you were trying to answer.
This is the multi-year folder right here. So we've done a multi-year comparison with the questions that we had that were exactly the same. And there's a GitHub issue, which will show you exactly what questions were exactly the same versus what aren't. And there's also the, hold on, I'll show you. In here, under contributor experience surveys, all of the questions that we ask year over year are in here as well. And then here's the 2018 one as well. So for instance, this is 2018. What areas do you contribute to was the same. I'm going to say from my just random knowledge in my brain, I think it was like 15 out of 24 were the same. I'm pretty sure it was something around there, including the question, here we go, including the please rate how challenging. That was directly verbatim so that we could do a multi-year analysis. So that's in there. And I think you're gonna see what I see, which is not much changed. Still a lot of the same problems. A lot more new folks took it this time. However, a lot more of those new folks indicated that they were at least members. So yeah, we learned a lot of, I feel like contributors are still mostly saying the same complaints, I think. Again, debugging test failures with, probably the one that we can pick out that has the most trends. And things like that. Just looking to see what else.
Any other questions for Paris with our 2 minutes remaining? Okay. Yeah, to echo what Lubomir said in the chat, I really appreciate you bringing the survey results to us. It looked like you got some pretty decent coverage, and I look forward to seeing more of the analysis.
Yep. And if anybody has any, you can see the survey questions for yourselves that are already checked into the repo. So if anybody does have any deeper analysis that they want to see, one, I already guarantee that it was done in that in our charts, so I can just hand you a chart. But two, you'll also have the Jupyter notebooks that are being in the middle of being checked into the community repo. So if you go to the community repo right now and look at the pull requests, you'll see one from Brian that says survey notebooks, and it's a huge file of a bunch of Python notebooks. So feel free to geek out on data. Enjoy. Eat it up. Nom, 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 nom.
Cool. Okay, and that is our hour, everybody. Thank you all so much for showing up. This has been the SIG Testing bi-weekly meeting. I will see you all here in 2 weeks. Have a happy Tuesday.
Bye, team. Miss y'all.